Hi, so I just wanted to point out a few cool things about Sean Thrower's book, Traversing the Fretboard, and you'll want to check out the full review that I'm doing on the website on thisisclassicalguitar.com, and which talks more about the book and the things I like and whatnot. But just to kind of clarify some of the ideas that I'm talking about, one of the great things about this book is kind of just how he approaches diving into fretboard knowledge from the beginner's kind of perspective. So most beginners will, by the time they're interested in like making a full exploration of the fingerboard, they probably have already gone through like a method book, and they've played some like easy pieces, and they've learned how to read in first position or maybe some other positions, and they probably learned some first position chords like C and like A and G and maybe E and D and stuff like that. So one of the great things about this book is I think it's from a really practical teaching perspective. He dives into some of these shapes that beginners might have already learned and then expands upon them to show you how they're movable, how they're connected to the musical shapes that make up musical theory on the guitar. And then slowly, by relating those things and getting you into the guitar more, and into the fretboard theory more, he eventually breaks it down into triads and teaching you everything you need to know and all a billion shapes that you're supposed to know for guitar. So to demonstrate this example, like on page 18, for example, you have your first open position C chord, which most beginners are going to know after going through a basic method book or something. And when you think about this C chord, in a way, there's a fret right here. The guitar is actually making that open string ring for you. So it's as if you're fingering the chord like this, and there's another finger there. But of course, the guitar does it for you. Just maybe bring that a little closer. So the cool thing about that is that when you take a C chord like this, first position C chord, you can actually just move that whole thing up a fret, and suddenly it's a C sharp or D flat major chord. If you move it up again, it's a D chord, D major chord. If you move it up again, it's a D sharp or E flat major chord, etc., etc. And of course, all your triads are within that shape too. Do, mi, so, or 1, 3, 5. Pretending that you're actually fretting that note. Here's a C sharp triad. 1, 3, 5, or do, mi, so. So all these basic chords that you might have learned as a beginner actually expand into these movable shapes. Same thing as the A chord. If you're thinking about your A chord like this, well, you're imagining a bar across the open strings here, and when you move it up a fret, now we have a A sharp chord or a B flat chord, and then a B chord, then a C chord, then a C sharp or D flat, and a D. So all from that one form that you already know. I'll just do one more example. If you're thinking about like your G shape, then you'd be barring those notes. And actually this is pretty impractical on the classical guitar, but you can still do it. So all of those shapes are very, very movable. Maybe the better example is the next one, the E chord, which everyone seems to know when they're a beginner, or you're doing like folk songs, or even just classical songs that'll come up all the time. And then if you finger it with 3, 4, 2, and imagine a bar there, your E chord can quickly become an F chord, or an F sharp chord, or a G chord, or an A chord. So it's a nice transition from beginner to more advanced theory. And then after that, of course, he dives into triadic shapes in first inversion, second inversion, root position, first inversion, second inversion, and teaches you everything you need to know and shows lots of musical examples. But it's just cool that he transitions that way. I think it's very practical from a learning perspective that you'd use things that you already know. In a way, it almost makes students kind of like proud of themselves that they know that one thing and like that it's so easy to transfer it to other ideas. Another thing I like about the book is how it's multi-stylistic. So it's not just for the classical guitarist, not just for the jazz guitarist or the blues or the rock player. It's kind of for everyone. So his examples in the book range from, for example, on page 47, he has this Caprice by Legnani, which I can't play, but so he's going through some of these triads here, including some diminished triads as well, and with classical examples. But then, like right underneath that is like a Django Reinhardt style gypsy jazz example. Which is pretty cool. Like you can see how this music theory is used in a variety of types of guitar music, which I think is really, really good, because at least when I teach these days, like I don't just teach classical anymore. It's not really practical for guitarists to just learn classical. They need to kind of learn a little bit of jazz and a little bit of other ideas too, just for their professional careers and for their own knowledge. I mean, as guitar players, I think multi-stylistic learning is really important. And same thing with the scale section too. Like when he dives into things like the pentatonic scales, like the major pentatonic scales, he has some exercises for like improvisation and sequences and learning these little musical ideas. But then he also has an example of Debussy, and that's pretty cool. Like that you get these different ideas back to back and next to each other, which you don't usually see in books. I also really like, in general, I like his scale section too. It follows this kind of these boxed patterns. And so, for example, for the major scales, there's 5 patterns that you'd want to learn based on roots, and he indicates the roots, adding all the notes in position in case you're using it for improvisation or for sight reading purposes. And then like the next pattern in the next box pattern, the next 4-fingered position. And pretty much the same fingerings as I use, except when I do some of the fingerings, I use squeeze shifts. So I'll put my 4th finger in to reach out, kind of like the Aaron Shearer book, but depending on whether you're doing this on classical or on electric and stuff, I don't know if the squeeze shifts are always that necessary. But I do use them a lot, and he doesn't, but that's fine. I mean, the patterns are exactly the same as the ones I use, so I really like the book, and I really like the patterns he uses. Some small differences in the fingerings that we might use. And like I said, again, he points out lots of different musical examples and little exercises and connects them with chord progressions. There's also chord progression sections to the book where he teaches you basic blues chord progressions and other common chord progressions, which is great. He also teaches you some ideas about comparing Segovia scale patterns with caged patterns on page 84, for example, or just like linking all those patterns together into movable patterns that you'd use across the fingerboard. So he really dissects it all and puts it all together for you. So I think that's pretty cool. And lots of other cool things in the book, like using certain rhythms and comping patterns, and there's all sorts of good stuff. So that's Sean Thrower's book, and read the full review on my website. This is classicalguitar.com. Thanks.